Welcome back. Thanks very much for joining us for this session, which is going to be focused on ESG. We've already heard a lot around impact investment, and we're going to focus on ESG and building back better in the panel. I'm delighted to welcome Christiane Conrads, who's going to give us an introductory presentation. I'm just picking up on some of those themes. Christiane.
Thank you, Richard. I'm very happy to do so. My name is just said Christiane Conrads. I'm a German qualified real estate lawyer, and I'm leading the EMEA real estate ESG team at PwC. So last week, Richard, you and the Real Asset Media team organized an event together with our EMEA ESG team at PwC. And I would like to start with the very strong key takeaways from the market panel. So the first agreement was that ESG criteria is now a must-have. The clear message was that there is no way around it. It's become mandatory. And the second really strong message was that the market panel agreed on was that even though the climate aspect is in the main focus right now and is of extremely important, when it comes to ESG criteria, all three areas, so the E and also the S and the EG, need to be taken into consideration. Basically, the environmental exposure of real estate has been on the agenda for asset managers for many years now. And the catalog of the environmental criteria is quite strong and detailed, as just mentioned. So, of course, the main focus right now is on climate change mitigation and also on climate change adaptation, but also in line with the EU taxonomy. The focus is mainly on four other environmental categories. The first one of them is the sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources. The second one is the transition to a circular economy. The third one is about pollution prevention and control. And the last one, the fourth one, is about protection of biodiversity and ecosystems. And when you look at the S in environmental social governance, this is, among other things, about how a company manages its relationship with its stakeholders, with its employees, with its suppliers, customers, and within the community in which it operates. And last but not least, when we speak about governance, the governance criteria set is basically the framework in which a company operates and would like to promote environmental and social targets. And it's basically about ensuring a responsible corporate management. So we see various drivers for the fulfillment of ESG criteria when it comes to real estate right now. One main driver is the regulatory development, which is taking place right now. I will come back to that on my next slide. In addition to regulatory requirements, we also see a very strong demand in the market for ESG compliant real estate solutions. And this is driven by stakeholder demand. So last week, in our valuation panel, it was quite interesting to see that anybody was agreed on the fact that the fulfillment of ESG criteria has an impact on valuation, but we are still at the beginning of a process with clear answers to how values increase if ESG criteria are being complied with. So this is basically due to lacking guidelines on a national or international level, and these guidelines are currently being further developed. But in addition to valuation, we also see that there are various studies available in the market right now that confirm the advantages of green buildings. Basically, it's for example, starting with better financing conditions or better insurance condition. And it's also kind of confirmed that green buildings provide for a more stable rental situation. Coming back to the regulatory development, which is taking place right now. Last week on the 10th of March, the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation became effective to a large extent. And this regulation is basically the first milestone of the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan, which aims at redirecting capital flows towards sustainable investments and developments. And the SFDR contains, as you can see on this page, substantive disclosure obligation for financial market participants and also financial advisors. And the aim of this directive is basically to put an end to greenwashing and to make sustainability profile of funds more transparent and therefore more comparable. And also you can see here on this page, the SFDR provides for three categories of funds. The first, the mainstream product, is basically funds that do not integrate any kind of sustainability into the investment process. And then you have so-called light green funds that are basically financial products that have environmental and social characteristics. And then you have the so-called dark green or Article 9 products, which are targeting sustainable investments, which are basically bespoke sustainable investments. And in addition to these classifications, the SFDR also provides for a very strong focus on the identification of adverse impacts on investments. So investors basically have to factor in how their investments have an impact on sustainability. And another milestone of the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan is basically the EU Taxonomy for Sustainable Economic Activities, which became effective last year in summer, and which provides for the first classification system. It's a legal framework basically defining when an economic activity can be regarded as being sustainable. The EU taxonomy defines 6 environmental targets, and the first 2 ones are climate related, which is basically climate change mitigation, and the second one is adaptation to climate change. And in relation to real estate, the EU taxonomy basically provides for 4 categories of investments. The first one is construction of new buildings, where it requires that the primary energy demand is 20% below the requirements for low energy buildings. Then you have individual renovation measures, which are aimed at sustainability, for example, the installation of renewables or photovoltaic power plants, for example. Then you have the renovation of existing buildings, where, for example, the renovation must achieve an energy saving of at least 30%. And then last but not least, the EU taxonomy in its current version provides for criteria in relation to the acquisition of buildings which were constructed before the end of last year. And they are to be compliant with the EU taxonomy if the EPC corresponds to Class A in accordance with national requirements. And in addition, existing buildings need to have an energy monitoring and assessment in place. So as I said before, so these European regulation are basically one of the main driver providing for more sustainable criteria in real estate right now. In our interdisciplinary EMEA ESG team, we are currently intensively involved in helping our clients not only to develop their own strategies, but also to rethink, adjust their strategies and implement them. And what we see right now is a very complex transformation process, which requires that all the different stakeholders internally working on it, you work in interdisciplinary teams, and it's quite a challenging process right now to keep track of the ongoing development when it comes to regulation in the market, but also to decide what measures basically are required and make sense for your own business operation. And on this page, you basically see the structure, the different step of the development and implementation of an ESG strategy. Basically, once an ESG strategy is in place, the next step is to make sure that it's probably being integrated in all the different processes. And one process, of course, is the investment process. So standard investment processes need to be changed insofar that ESG criteria are also being implemented. And what you see on this page is basically the result of an ESG due diligence, which we are currently performing. So this is basically a result of our interdisciplinary team consisting of lawyers, tax advisors, consultants, and also our valuation colleagues. And we've also made use of our climate excellence tools, which basically gives a climate risk assessment, which you see on the bottom right part. Basically, when you look at the bottom, on the bottom right, there you see the results of the use of our climate excellence tool, which carries out a climate risk assessment. And when you look at the different scenarios accordance with the Paris Climate Agreement, you see, for example, when an asset becomes stranding and how much you need to invest to avoid the stranded asset. And what is also quite interesting, so I mentioned it before, so there is it's still hard to determine what the exact impact on valuation is. Right now, what we see the market carrying out ESG due diligence upon acquisition and identifying potential improvements which in the area of ESG, and use that as leverage for the purchase price negotiation. For example, the ESG due diligence for a building which was built in 2000 B certificate of platinum there and is now 6 years old, and you see that if it would be 100% ESG compliant and also, for example, in line with the EU taxonomy, its value would amount to 165.9 million. So the adjusted market value amounts only to 1.9 million. So there's quite a lot of room for purchase price negotiations here. And as I said before, it's not about integrating ESG criteria and the strategy into all different processes. And last but not least, it's very important to integrate criteria also into legal documentation. On this page, basically left-hand side, the so-called quick wins, which are completely independent from the ESG strategy and should be basically considered in all legal documentation of any kind right now when it comes to real estate. Basically, on the left-hand side, it's about transparency, and what we mean with that, it's agreeing on data exchange clauses, and of course, these rules must be in compliance with data protection rules, and the protection of business secrets must be complied with. But there's already huge process. We see it in lease agreements. We also see it in SPAs. We see it in project development agreement, that in particular requirements to make sure that this is being dealt with in the legal document. As I said before, it's also the legal, the regulatory landscape is still being developed. The SFDR and also the EU taxonomy will be further developed and implemented over the next years. So here, when we're talking about long-term agreements, it's quite important to ensure that you have so-called adaptation clauses, which ensure that the contracts can be adjusted to comply with future regulatory requirements or with changes of strategies. And then it's all about risk management, so more stricter requirements when it comes to social and governance criteria, much stricter focus on compliance. So this is also something which should be taken into account when drafting legal documentation. And last but not least, it's about creating more healthy, environmentally friendly real estate solutions. So this is something which also should be reflected, for example, in representations and warranties. And with these words, I'd like to close and hand back to you. Maybe just 3 more key takeaways also from last week. So what we see right now is very important to monitor legislative process, and also to be to keep that in mind, to avoid future expensive capex measures, then also to approach in transaction processes, and to work in interdisciplinary teams to enhance more sustainable real estate solutions. Thank you.